I am extremely sunburned. Hi folks, Harry here. Today I'm going to have a discussion with you that I think is a very necessary discussion to have, and it was inspired by one thing. Recently on my channel I did a book review of Stephen King's most recent novel, Billy Summers, and the response on that video has been absolutely amazing. It's got around 2,500 views, so thank you for that. But the views on that video is not what I'm going to talk about today. Specifically, it's the comment section. In that book review, I gave a trigger warning for sexual abuse in this novel. I believe that as a content creator and as someone whose target audience is generally younger people, I feel like it is my responsibility to warn you about any sensitive content in the books that I recommend, just so you aren't surprised or shocked going into these books, and hopefully you are not badly affected by the content in them. Or based on my trigger warnings, you can just choose to avoid the book altogether. I feel like that is definitely my duty as a content creator and as someone who recommends books as a hobby. On my video review of Billy Summers, I got a few comments talking about the trigger warning that I gave in the video. I also just want to make it clear that I am not talking down to the people who commented these things, and I'm also not trying to say that they are wrong for having the opinions that they have. I just want to open a discussion with you. I received one comment on the video basically saying that we should not criticise authors for including sensitive content in their books. We are becoming too sensitive, and demanding what an author includes in their books is not our right. I also had another comment on the video basically saying that they want to be surprised by these aspects, and specifically with Stephen King, they would rather go into the novel knowing absolutely nothing and then being shocked and disturbed by the content in it, and if I warn people of the content then it kind of rids them of the experience. That comment is what I'm going to talk about later because that is a little bit more complicated and very layered, so for now I'm just going to focus on the first comment. What this comment was trying to communicate is that we should not censor literature and demand that authors change the way that they write because we might be affected by the sensitive content. What this person didn't understand is that I was not criticising King for adding these aspects into the book. My intention was to warn you guys about this content, so if sexual abuse is something that triggers you, you should go into this book with caution. I'm not saying that I think that the sensitive content should be cut out of the book. I'm just saying that if there are any of you who are affected by these things, just to be wary. The next comment was from a really nice person who was very understanding about what I had to say. It's just something that I thought would spark a discussion. They said that they would rather be disturbed or horrified without warning so that the work's effect does not get diluted. For works of horror, I completely understand this. So, for example, in Stephen King's It, if you were told everything horrifying about this book, then it would definitely detract from the experience. I would completely understand being frustrated by someone warning you about that stuff because it's the stuff that if you're reading horror you might want to get surprised by. But the reason why I chose this book as an example is it also contains things like sexual content with minors, rape, and domestic abuse. And I think that it is my duty to warn you guys about these things, but not the typical aspects of horror. I think that there is a fine line between things that genuinely trigger people and things that scare people. Horror is meant to be effective, but some horror delves into the world of things that can trigger people, and that is where I draw the line. That is where I will tell you guys to go into the book with caution. I suppose some people may consider trigger warnings a type of spoiler because you are telling the person who is about to read the book about something that happens in the book. And I guess that is a spoiler. But I think that, as I've said, it is my responsibility as a content creator to warn you about certain things. Okay, I'm going to move on from horror now. Here's the question. Should books come with trigger warnings? This is a very complicated question to answer, but I'm going to try and do it here. My personal opinion about this is I think that books should come with trigger warnings. So on the first few pages of book, I think it would be ideal to just have a list, trigger warnings, and then potential things that may negatively affect readers. I also want to add that movies have been giving us trigger warnings for years because on the back of, say, a DVD, it will tell you the age rating and also things like violence, swearing, threats, sexual content, that sort of thing. Movies have been doing it for years, so why can't books? Also, news articles have been doing a similar thing when they will show a picture with sensitive content and you have to approve whether or not you want to see it. Before answering this question, I did consider the possibility of it being the reader's responsibility to Google ahead, research, if this book has any sensitive content. But then I decided against that because it is very likely that this reader may just stumble across this book, go into it, and then be absolutely horrified by what happens in it. Not everyone has to read the trigger warnings. Like, if someone doesn't want to read the trigger warnings, they don't have to read the trigger warnings. Like, not everyone wants to read the copyright page at the beginning of a book. I think it should be an option. But if the option is there to read the trigger warnings of a book, there's no going wrong with that. Because the people who don't want the trigger warnings can just skip ahead, and the people who think that they may be negatively affected by the content can read the trigger warnings, think either, okay, I'm going to avoid this book, or okay, let me mentally prepare myself, and then I'll dive into the book. So earlier I was talking about horror and how horror should be effective in scaring you and maybe disturbing you and in a way getting under your skin. But with horror it is very difficult to differentiate the line between things that are intentionally supposed to scare you and potential things that could be considered triggers. So let's take a book that isn't horror in the slightest, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Just from reading the synopsis of this book, you are made aware that this book follows some teenagers who are living with cancer. I suppose that itself is a trigger warning, because if anyone does not want to read about this, they can just put the book down and go read another book that they want to read. But sometimes a book's triggers cannot be worked into the synopsis alone. Take a book like One of Us is Lying, for example. There is something that happens very close to the end of the book that could be a massive, massive trigger for a lot of people. But if I mention this trigger, it is a spoiler for the entire book. So that's where the problem does come in. One way to get around this is something that Sarah J Maas books have done in the past. On the back of the Throne of Glass series, it says, contains mature content not suitable for younger readers. I haven't read Kingdom of Ash, so I have no idea what that refers to, but that is a way to get around directly referencing this potential trigger. I should probably add that I'm very well aware that this mature content could just be referring to violence, sex, and maybe profanity, but it's a similar sort of concept that I thought might be applicable here. So there are many ways that a reader can be provided with trigger warnings before heading into a book. The publishers, if it is not a spoiler, can integrate it into the synopsis. There could be a list of trigger warnings at the very beginning of the book, which you can skip over if you so wish to, or you can just Google a list of trigger warnings. I have now opened this discussion and I want you guys to continue it. I don't think that I am 100% qualified to talk about this topic and give a definitive answer should trigger warnings be given in books, but I think that this is something that can be continued down in the comments below. For anyone who does disagree with me, please try to be sensitive in the comments down below, because a lot of people watching this video may be sensitive to some of the things that you have to say. Thank you for listening to me, and I will see you next time with a new video. Goodbye.